Good afternoon. My team is going to talk about brides, maids, and prostitutes. This article is by the author Nicole Constable. Over the past several years, some feminist scholars of migration have begun to argue that it makes sense to talk about the migration of prostitutes, maids, and mail order brides, as if they were all a part of the same larger phenomenon. This is from Meher, Ehring, and Hochschild. The literature of sex workers has influenced the author, that is Nicole Constable, thinking about correspondence marriage, not because brides and sex workers are fundamentally alike, but because they are both subjects of the wider discourse on trafficking, women's agency, and women's victimization. The women's emigration to rich countries. Because the migrant sex workers, maids, and correspondence brides often follow the broader pattern movement of women from poorer, they are often assumed or implied to share common structures of inequality that define, constrain, and propel their mobility. The mobility of women from poorer parts of Asia who perform the reproductive labor from people in wealthier regions is well documented. Despite some border gender migration patterns, the overall theme lends itself too easily to the well-accepted logic of a more simplistic modernization narrative. Of course, poor women will want to move from a poor or backwards country to work for or marry a richer person in a modern country. The structural inequality of such a situation provides a common and readily accepted logic for the growing pattern for female labor and marriage migration. According to the PwC, that this means PricewaterhouseCoopers, and this is a multinational professional services network of firms headquartered in London, United Kingdom, operating as partnerships under the PwC brand. This PwC, according to this one, a mail order bride is the result of a formal transaction between a man and a woman from different countries, usually brokered by an agent, who is part of the mail order bride industry via catalogs or the internet. This means that sometimes a guy from, let's say from the United States of America wants to marry a woman from maybe, let's say, Canada, but they don't meet yet, and thanks to this agency, they have an agent that provides the guy a catalog or internet page where they can see some women, and they can marry them, they can choose them, and start talking to them via internet, and then they get a date to get a meet and finally see if they're gonna get married. Also counts as a mail order brides women who have met their husbands through computer dating in Canada, and women who have married their employers. Their definition is so broad that it's difficult to imagine any form of Filipino migration that will not be trafficking. The PwC makes no case for determining that some foreign brides are trafficked and others are not, nor do they attempt to distinguish between those who were coerced and others who were not. This means that the PwC doesn't have a list of the women that got married with another guy from another country, that the guy is not a bad person, that they don't traffic the girl that the PwC provides, and there's not a list of this. In the article, the author mentioned two authors, that it's Glodava and Onizuka. These ones cite several unsuccessful case stories, all of which involve abuse and most of which end in divorce. To illustrate some of the difficulties faced by mail order brides as trafficked women, Um, Next are two cases that explain what Glodava and Onizuka cite. Chira, a 45-year-old school teacher in the Philippines who has considered an old maid by her friends and colleagues and had become increasingly anxious to get married. Chira hoped to meet a man who could help support her family and submitted her photography to an introduction agency. After corresponding with Dean for a year and a half, they met in person and eventually married. In the United States, Chira was faced with caring for three abusive stepchildren. The children treated her like a maid, and Dean allowed it. Eventually, she ran away to a shelter, and as Glodova and Nizuka write, she is now working and happy to be free of her abusive situation. She has divorced her husband and has acquired the U.S. permanent residence. This means that on the agency, Chira wasn't explained by the agency that Dean had three children and how the children were going to treat her. And she wasn't expecting that she was treated as a maid, and she was not happy with that, so she decided to, as in the article says, to run away and finally got divorced by him. Another case is Amor. She was 42 when she married a corporate lawyer named Don. She had been a chemist working for a prestigious pharmaceutical company in Manila when Don saw her photograph in one of the mail order bride catalogs. He was 72. Don started bringing home his mistress. When the mistress moved in, Amor decided to leave him, despite the stigma of a failed marriage. She moved to California and decided against reconciliation. On this case, Amor wasn't happy that after she married Don, Don had a mistress. So he doesn't think about his marriage with Amor, and that this makes Amor to leave him. There are some more cases like Chira and Amor, and these cases wants to show that even that in the agency that they was treated doesn't mean that the agency is going to promise a healthy life, a full life, like they want, helping their families, or the guy who married them was going to respect her or treat her as she deserves, or give her what she wants. This just was like the access to got them, like the girls, to another country to get away from their original countries and from their past life.
Hi, my name is Giovanna. Continuing with the subtopic Discursive Blurs. Roland Tolentino's article Bodies, Letters and Catalogs. Filipinas in Transnational Space serves as an example of the blurring of boundaries between several categories of women workers and migrants. He analyzed mail-order brides as bodies in transnational space alongside the bodies of Filipina maids or helpers, sex workers, sweet shops, factory workers, and nurses. Tolentino aptly observes that Filipino women's racial, national, and gender identities are connected to their opportunities for mobility as wives, sex workers, and maids. Labels. The author refers to the fact that in the course of the investigation among Filipino domestic workers in Hong Kong and among women involved in correspondence relation. He noticed a disjuncture between women's own labels, their understanding of themselves, and their roles as future brides and domestic workers. On the hand, and the labels that foreign, including employers, government organizations, employment agencies, and research imposed on them. Political activists in Hong Kong prefer the term domestic worker to domestic helper or maid. In the Philippines, mail order bride is used by staff members of organizations such as the Commission on Filipinos Overseas to refer to women who men spoken through correspondence. This carries strong implications about the commodi- commodification of women, the commodification of the process of introduction and traffic. Women and men. The term mail order bride also helps explain with textual analysis of so-called mail order bride catalogs, often impose a sexual reading onto images that appear in actuality to be very innocent, more reminiscent of images we might find in a school yearbook or in a passport. Writing against labels. So far, the author has shown how images of Asian maids, sex workers, and brides have been blurred in cultural studies, discursive analysis, as well as in literature more oriented to anti-traffic activists. Below are two short ethnographic sketches to question more notion of mail order brides and trafficked women. Bob and 5'8", a Filipino US couple in the Philippines in the late 1990s. They had been married over 15 years and had two children together. They had met in the early to mid 1990s when Faith was in her early 20s and Bob in his 50s. Bob's adult children opposed their marriage. His son urged him to make Faith sign a prenuptial agreement, and his daughter-in-law warned him that Faith was a prostitute or a gold digger. Faith felt her but understood that they were concerned about their father. Eventually, she won them over. Faith said that she never regretted her decision to marry Bob. She became a US citizen and they had two children. For several years, while they lived in the United States, she was lonely and homesick. After his retirement, she convinced Bob to move back to the Philippines to be near her family, where they could also afford to hire a helper and a cook. The initial suspicions of Bob's adult children about fights, motives, and character are quite common among friends and relatives of men who are married to foreign women. This story illustrates both the popular blues that can be driven by third world women who perform various forms of reproductive work like the subtle difference and motivations that can never be fully represented in a simple modernization narrative. Ping was 50 years old, divorced from Beijing. Elvin was a 65 years old artist and lawyer from California. They had met over the internet on a website where men and women enter their names, photographs, and introduce themselves, and where a fee is only paid at the point when someone, a man or woman, chose to correspond with a particular person. Pin was attracted to Elvin for his artistic and intellectual pursuits. They met in person when he came to Beijing for a 2-week visit. At the end of the visit, they continued to correspond and Elvin proposed. Ping was careful weighing Elvin's proposal. Eventually, she agreed to go to the United States on a fiancé visa for 19 days, after which time she was required by law to either marry him or return to China. Pink explained that part of the problem was that Elvin thought he owned her. He had owns resent her attempts to gain greater personal and economic independence, and also refused to offer her greater financial or emotional support. By 25, she had obtained a divorce and was living in the United States as a permanent resident. Such stories point to a problem with the assumption that male orders brides are trafficked victims.
I will finally talk about productive birds. The author quotes Kimpadu, who analyzed the following points. The male organ braids are the similarly depicted as trafficked victims in need of the rescue. Unlike those who fight for change in the sex industry, and not because of its provision, and who attempt to represent a different perspective. They are also subject to the charge of false consciousness. The PwC criticizes any narrow definition of the trafficking that seeks to isolate, choose, of abuse, a position that they suggest is being peddled by feminists who seek to legalize prostitution as a legitimate form of work. In keeping with Pompidou's arguments and in contrast to the PwC perspective, women's own attempts through their words and actions to counter or resist and in some cases strategically embrace the very imaginings of submissive wife or passive sex object that are uncritically reproduced in the anti-trafficking literature. Then why then we may avoid reproducing the notion that woman's subservience and victimization is a natural and expected outcome. The author's conclusion. She primarily concerned us not being with the fact that there exist three separate bodies of the litter on brides, maids, and sex workers, but with the problematic ways in the which they are sometimes assumed to be one and the same. Attempts to communicate with advocate for and provide support for forgiving brides would benefit by dropping the mail-order brides label altogether, considering instead the shades and the different needs and the interest of the immigrant woman. The trafficking label also requires critical rethinking. For a practical perspective, its adoption is closely linked